everybody. Happy Monday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. Extra amazing. It's a bro show, Ryan. People live for the pound. That's what we got going on today. Crystal will be back tomorrow, though, so don't worry.
And she'll be here Wednesday.
That's right. She'll be in on Wednesday. So we're swapping things around and making things a lot more fun over here at Breaking Points, the most ambitious crossover show of all time. But we've got some great topics for everybody today. Let's go ahead and come up on me. Let's see what we got. Iran. Okay, so we're going to start, obviously, with the Iranian attack on Israel, some of the fallout, watching the Israeli war cabinet, what their response will be. President Biden issuing a warning to Israel saying, don't widen the war, but we will remain and we will see what happens, as Trump often used to say. We will also have Dr. Trita Parsi in the show. He's going to analyze some of the attack, the ramifications. He accurately predicted last week on our show that an attack would be forthcoming and that the fallout from the embassy was much bigger than much of the media was letting on. We're going to talk about Donald Trump, who had a very interesting moment at his Allentown, Pennsylvania rally, where he seemed to concur with Genocide Joe as the nickname. He's trying to foster some dissension in the Democratic ranks. And then we're also going to take a look at some new interesting polling, both good for Trump, bad for Trump, and some possible signals about how abortion is going to play out in the race. Ukraine, some fascinating stuff going on there. Trump seeming flip-flop and endorsing some sort of Lend-Lease style program for Ukraine aid, while Senator J.D. Vance, part of the MAGA contingent, speaking out against the idea of aid to Ukraine entirely. We're going to dig into that. Cornel West, one of the third-party candidates, has picked his vice president. It's a BLM activist who's had some interesting takes in the past. And then Bill Maher, of course, making just some let's just say interesting again, comments on abortion. Ryan and I are going to break that down, and I'm doing a monologue on the O.J. Simpson trial and its lasting effects and how it manifested itself even upon his death here in the media. But Ryan, before we get to that, as you and I were just discussing, we've got some interesting plans in the works, so people need to subscribe so you can hear a little bit more about that, breakingpoints.com. So I think people will enjoy that. Let's go ahead and start with those attacks on Iran. Guys, let's go ahead and play this and put it up on the screen so I can talk a little bit over it. We've got some video here. This was released by Channel 14 News in Israel. It appears to be pulling from Iranian media, which actually shows the launch of some of those ballistic missiles that were launched towards Israel. They took several hours to go. What you see in front of you was also released by the Israelis. This shows some of the drones that were heading into Israeli skies. The flashes that everybody can see are those actually being shot down by Iron Dome. In some cases, you can see that they did make contact and they were attacking largely military installations, it appears, in Israel. But still, I mean, stunning nonetheless. That image in particular, right over Jerusalem, you can see the Temple Mount, and you can just see hundreds of drones that are there in the sky with the Iron Dome program that was engaging it. I mean, what did you make of this, Ryan? I did a breaking news segment, but this is the first of the audience. We'll get to hear from you on it.
So the reporting that we have from this is that the United States told Iran that if they were going to respond, they had to do it within certain parameters. Mm-hmm. And, Iran Iran is not a client state of the U.S.
Right.
It can do what it wants to do. However, it understands that if we draw a line and they go outside of that line, then the cost that they're going to pay is going to be higher, whether it might not necessarily be immediately kinetic, but we have lots of ways that we can make life difficult for them. And the assault that they eventually launched was compared by a friend of mine to, that scene in Austin Powers where Austin Powers is driving the steamroller?
Ah, yes.
And there's the security guard he has like an
Classic.
hour to get away from the steamroller. And that's kind of what they did with these drones.
Okay.
What they did is they created an international spectacle. So the entire world is watching. And the domestic audience sees the entire world watching. Mm-hmm. So just by virtue of that, the Iranian regime has then satisfied kind of the domestic demand that there be some type of a response to this attack on the consulate in Damascus. But what it also does is it gives this entire armada from Jordan to Egypt to the U.S. to the U.K. to Israel hours to intercept everything. And you saw a lot of kind of Israeli pundits saying, how embarrassing for Iran. They sent all of these missiles, and yet Tel Aviv still stands. Look at our beach, how pristine it remains. That was probably Iran's hope, that they want to launch an attack, to make it look like they're launching an attack, but not actually do the kind of thing that requires Israel to then respond.
We got to spend a lot of time on this because this is going to be a huge matter of debate. Now, currently, that was the way that the White House interpreted the attack. However, that is not the way that the Israeli right wing is interpreting the attack. The Israeli right wing is like, no, this was just a victory of Iron Dome. Without Iron Dome, without the U.S., the UK military, the Jordanian military, the Saudi military, all allowing our jets. I mean, that's another big question. How many of these things were shot down by the United States and how many were shot down by Israel? They ain't telling us that number, I can tell you that. They claim 99% interception. I would love to know what the actual Israeli interception rate and then what the U.S. assistance rate. CENTCOM, the United States military, has not released that. We do know that all of our Western militaries were engaged actually in shooting down some of these drones. Now, the reason why I'm sticking to this is because the way that you look at the attack matters a lot. If you think that it was intended to have a mass casualty incident and was not designed, as you said, to telegraph for an hours-long approach and attack, well, then that colors one way you're going to respond. If you think it was an intended mass casualty incident and it was designed to kill a lot of people, well, then obviously you want to hit them back 10 times as hard, and it's not your fault that the defense worked. Go ahead.
I would flip it around.
Okay.
I'd say people start from their desired response, right? So like Ben Gvir, Itamar Smotrich, like these guys, they want a massive war with Iran. And so then they're going to retcon onto the attack whatever they need to justify that response. So they were always going to say that this was, before, as soon as it started, you started seeing from the Israeli right, this is a strategic victory for us. We now have the international legitimacy to launch a full-scale attack on Iran. And not to pick on them, everybody else is the same way. Like people like me that don't want to see World War III are biased in how they see it and say like, look, it's obvious why Iran didn't cause more damage, because causing more damage would have led to World War III. It's a rational actor. They don't want to lead to that. So we all do have to put our biases out there.
Important to note that, because this is here what we have from the War Cabinet Minister, Benny Gantz. Let's go ahead and put this on play on the screen. I'm going to read some of what he said in terms of a translation. He says, yesterday, Iran launched an attack on Israel and met the strength of the Israeli security system. Iran is a global problem. It is a regional challenge, and it is also a danger to Israel. Yesterday, the world clearly stood together with Israel in the face of the danger. For Israel against Iran, the world against Iran. This is the result. This is the strategic achievement which we must leverage for Israel's security. This incident is not over. The strategic alliance and the regional cooperation system that we built and stood is a significant test. It needs to be strengthened right now. Israel proved yesterday that it is an anchor of military and technological power and an anchor of security in the Middle East. Faced with the threat of Iran, we will build a regional coalition and collect the price from Iran in a way and at a time that suits us. So that is the line that I'm zeroing in on. In a way and in a manner at a time that we choose. This is after an Israeli War Cabinet meeting occurred. Now, this War Cabinet meeting allegedly took a very interesting turn from what we know in the inside. We can put this up there on the screen here. President Biden allegedly told Prime Minister Netanyahu during a call immediately after the attack on Saturday, he says, listen, the United States is not going to support any Israeli counterattack against Iran. Inside of the War Cabinet, allegedly, Benny Gantz and also the defense minister both supported an immediate strike, retaliatory strike on Iran. Netanyahu appears to have backed away from that, at least allegedly because Biden told him not to. But, and this is where I want to make big buts. At the very same time, the Wall Street Journal and others are reporting that there is still a significant contingent in the Israeli military cabinet, within the Israeli right, and domestic populace that is clamoring for a response to the Iranian regime. So just because Biden said, hey, you guys had your strategic victory, don't do it and we won't join you, that doesn't mean that they won't do it. I mean, the Israelis have some of the most advanced military technology in the world.
So if we're going to give Biden credit, we can say that there was a moment amid the attack and in its immediate aftermath where the Israeli right was promising, not just demanding, but they were promising that there was going to be an unprecedented response, an immediate and unprecedented response. People were saying things like, April 12th or April 14th or whenever this attack was going to happen is a day that will like live on in history. Like, and that could have happened. Like if certain people had their fingers on certain buttons, those attacks could have been launched. Biden did say, look, if you do that, you're on your own. Take the win, like take the W was the line he gave to Netanyahu. And so we'll give him credit that the world has not ended yet. Here we are.
Been 2 days.
The sun has risen again, so here we are. But like you said, there is still intense pressure from the Israeli right. And what we're going to find out is who is really guiding Israeli foreign policy here. Is it the far right, or is it the kind of left of Netanyahu, which is a kind of hilarious concept to think about. But Ronald Bergman, the Israeli journalist, got it in a pretty mind-blowing quote from this Israeli Situation Room, where the person said something like, if these talks in the war cabinet, were aired live on YouTube, there'd be 4 million people at Ben Gurion Airport rushing to get out of this country.
Yeah, that is such an important point, because that is exactly the question is inside, they're trying to telegraph restraint. They're saying that the U.S. won't back them and all of this. We want to believe rational actor theory. But one of the things that is honestly annoying the crap out of me is that I continue to see U.S. politicians be like, this is an unprovoked, unprecedented attack. And I'm like, okay, listen, I'm not saying that the Iranians are good people or the IRGC are our friends or our enemy, but you blew up their embassy in Damascus. And what they're like is they're saying, they're like, well, it wasn't a real embassy. It was a military outpost. You're probably right. But guess what, guys? We have CIA bases inside every embassy in the world. I mean, under this logic,
called an embassy.
The Russians would be well within their rights under this logic to blow up the U.S. Embassy in Kiev or the U.S. Outpost in Lvov in Poland, which is like the major thoroughfare of all the weapons, and then or the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw. It's like, what do you think is happening there? These are all military outposts. It has been for all time.
And didn't they let the New York Times in there to show them how they were like wargaming the entire thing? It is a what do we call it when Hamas has a headquarters, a command and control center?
Yes.
Like it is like we have command and control centers.
That's right.
And we would absolutely not tolerate it. And it doesn't mean you're justifying the attack to acknowledge that it was provoked. Like it's okay to say that. I saw some of those posts too from I think maybe it was Steve Daines and some others.
No, these are like U.S. senators.
Yeah, U.S. senators. Like these are this unprovoked attack, just absolutely out of nowhere, except in response to the thing they've said they're going to respond to.
Yeah, and that's why I want to put that in context. By the way, Lvov is in Ukraine. I apologize. It used to be part of Poland, but I do know that it's right on the border with Poland, and that is where the weapons are coming across. My point is only being that we have embassy outposts and other people all across the world that are engaged in this type of activity.
What do you
guys? Who wants to guess what's going on in the U.S. Embassy in Moscow? Like, what do you think is going on in the U.S. Embassy of Riyadh or the U.S. Embassy in Kabul? Or I guess we don't have that one anymore. The U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. And these are all military outposts.
And they did kill a top general and many of his staff.
Right.
So like even if you say that was completely fine and hey, they're all fair game, they still did kill them.
Yes.
So it's not unprovoked.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, exactly right. And, let's think back to the Soleimani killing, whenever Trump greenlit the Soleimani killing. We got lucky. Trump actually called off an imminent attack, that was in response after the Iranians shot down some U.S. Navy spy plane. I think it was unmanned at the time, but it would have killed like several hundred Iranians. And Trump found that out, and he's like, forget this. We're not doing this. Yeah. But then you also have, there were several U.S. soldiers who were wounded, actually, in retaliatory attacks in Iraq as a result of that. So we can't say that it didn't have no response. All things are going to have a response, whether you view it as legitimate or not. But it was very certainly not, quote unquote, unprovoked. It didn't happen inside of a vacuum. You could defend it, if you want to, but let's just all be honest. There's also a big question here about the matter of Iron Dome and the amount of money that the defense of this one attack actually costs. Let's put this up there on the screen. The current estimate, according to the IDF, who was an economic advisor to the IDF chief of staff, says that the overnight defense against the Iranian attack cost between 4 to 5 billion Israeli shekels, which is equivalent to 1 to 1.3 billion. Now, what was also noted by your colleague Mortaza is that because the vast majority of this took place within the Iron Dome system, those interceptors are all manufactured and paid for by the United States, which means all of us are the ones who just paid for that missile defense.
Plus we shot a lot of missiles
I was
ourselves,
going
our own
to
jets
say,
and
that's
our
another
missiles.
question here, which is the type of aircraft that were used to shoot down some of these ballistic missiles, that shoot down some of these drones. The current estimate on how much these drones cost is anywhere from like a couple hundred to tens of thousands of dollars, not that much money. So asymmetrically, I mean, it was a huge economic cost to the U.S. The Iron Dome system also has been significantly strained ever since the war with Hamas has gone on. And of course, we're the ones who are replenishing all of that technology and bearing the brunt and the cost of that. It just, what I always like to highlight with these things, Ryan, is everyone's like, well, everyone said missile defense doesn't work. I'm like, well, that's not the point. The point is, what does it look like in a sustained attack? Right. One of the things that we've learned from Ukraine is that the Russians have developed the perfect strike package to get through Western defense systems. Sure, they can't use some, and they frequently will have some shot down, but they figured it out. And that's the point is, yeah, it works once. That's awesome. But what does it, how does it work on day 296 of a war? That's actually a question where not a lot of people want to know the answer in terms of the working rate and the cost.
On the cost point, this is the same thing we've seen with the Houthis, where they're sending these, drones that cost hundreds or at most like thousands of dollars towards ships, and the U.S. is sending $2 million cruise missiles to knock them out. Or whatever they're sending is in the millions of dollars each and every time, and that's just not a calculation that you can take forever. But your point on the strategic benefit of this is interesting as well. Like you said, the Russians have learned, through the practice, trial and error of how to get through this super expensive curtain of defense. And last night, the Russians and the Iranians and actually, well, the entire world that's curious about it, got to see what it would look like with Israel and all of its allies launching a full-fledged anti-missile defense approach. So now they know, like, okay, this is where they're coming from the sea. This is where they're coming from space. Now, they probably knew, let's say, 80% of that already, but a lot of valuable intelligence was picked up last night.
You get a ton, from the Chinese, from the Russians. Everybody is looking at this. The other thing that I would note is you could see that President Biden basically knew the exact time and hour of the attack. So one of the things that we gave away is how deeply the CIA, the NSA, and others have penetrated the highest echelons of the Iranian military.
And
you think they're not going to respond to that? Like, you don't think they're immediately going to change their comms? This was something that happened after the Russian invasion, where we basically gave away the whole game as to how deeply we penetrated the Russian military, higher in command and control. We knew everything from the time of the attack to Ukraine and all of that. My mea culpa was I didn't believe them, but clearly they are good at some things, these intel folks. And what did we give away? They're like, yeah, we know everything about what you say, what you do, the time of your attack, the hour, etc. Now, maybe that's by intention, certainly possible. But, if you're smart, what do you say? Okay, the enemy has total, visibility into our comms, so let's change everything. And that was for an attack, not on us, on somebody else.
Right. So, you are giving that up. At the same time, some of it was intentional.
Yeah, that's right.
There was a direct line. And Turkey was the go-between, and it was through Turkey that the U.S. actually communicated back to Iran, like, here are the parameters within which we expect, if an attack is going to take place.
Well, that's what's complicated. So actually, it's interesting because people are seizing upon that report saying that Biden greenlit the attack. At the same time, this is the problem with Biden. I mean, what he continues to do is just put himself in a situation where he just gets humiliated on the world stage by basically everybody, from his allies to the enemies to the aggressors. Here we have President Biden imminently before the attack, the day before the attack. Here was his message to Iran.
What is your message to Iran in this moment?
Don't.
Yeah, how did that work out? He said the same thing to Russia, if people want to remember, back in February of 2022. He's like, my message to Putin, don't. Well, they did. Yeah. So now what? It's like, this is where, you're putting yourself in a situation where you'd be like, look, it'd be like one of those where we will immediately respond, all of this. But, if this is where he gets he's flanked from his left and his right, because now what we have here is it's clear that people are not listening to President Biden, which is embarrassing for a global superpower. But then you've got a huge invitation right now from the Israeli and the U.S. right wing who are attacking Biden, saying that we need more deterrence through force and that we need to employ even more force on behalf of Israel and the Iranians and employ like more military action, get more deeply enmeshed. Then at the same time, you see also that the Israelis don't necessarily listen whenever they're told what to do or what not to do. That kind of brings us back to the genesis of how did this all happen? That strike on the embassy. Apparently, this is from what we know so far, Biden and the White House told the Israelis, they're like, listen, don't hit the Iranians without telling us about it. And they said, yeah, okay, cool. And then they just didn't tell us anything about it. That strike was totally within their purview. And this is what bothers me about it too. I'm like, okay, you guys want to do that? Be my guest. But then you bear the cost. Right. You bear the consequences. Whenever people, and this is what we've seen through the emboldening of the Israelis, is because we've set no red line, nothing, we have no conditions on our aid, they feel perfectly in their power to do whatever the hell they want. And that's how you get to a significant departure point of miscalculation. The ante gets upped, right. One thing goes wrong. I mean, just imagine one Iron Dome missile goes wrong and that Temple Mount gets it. Now what? I mean, we're in a whole new world living in that.
I think that's that's exactly right. I mean, I forgot what I was going to say. Anyway, go ahead.
And really, what I think is important, just to underscore, from the Iranians, the communication here with the Israelis, is that Biden has injected a tremendous amount of uncertainty into the international system. We'll defend Ukraine. Putin is a war criminal. He's got to go. What does that signal send to the Ukrainians? Fight to the last man. Right. Now we're like, well, we didn't really mean it. Yeah. And it's like, well, and they're all confused. I don't think we should have said it in the first place. I think and it should have been very clear from the beginning.
And the only shift from Biden, this was what I was going to say, has been to use the word ironclad over and over and over again.
That's right.
And so if you're Israel, what you hear from Biden is that his commitment is ironclad. Ironclad means it does not matter what Israel does. The U.S. will have their back. So if we say, hey, we would prefer a heads up before you strike, let's say, an Iranian embassy somewhere in Damascus. Like, okay, but your commitment to us is ironclad, right? Yeah, of course, guys, ironclad commitment. Like, okay, well then we're just going to do what we're going to do and you're going to support us. Now, maybe Israel feels like it can't launch an offensive attack on Iran without the support of kind of U.S. aircraft and U.S. sea power. And so that had something to do with their decision not to launch it yet. But they certainly feel like no matter what they do, the U.S. is going to put its resources behind them in a way that is self-destructive to its own interests in the region.
Yeah, I think this is this is very important for people to underscore. Just we are in a moment of a lot of uncertainty. U.S. military equipment was involved in shooting these down. U.S. service members, including U.S. warships, were involved in shooting some of these down. We've had, apparently, the USS Eisenhower hasn't had a port call in months because they're just stuck in the Middle East sitting there waiting to shoot down things and to be engaged in the war. There's a high level of readiness and of anxiety in the military. And just because something didn't pop off in 48 hours doesn't mean that it won't. It took the Iranians, it was about a week, I think, to respond to the embassy attack. People have in their heads this idea that the escalation ladder and other things move at a lightning pace. And that's sometimes the case. But very often, it's slow and then fast all at the same time. So you take a week to deliberate, then you make a thing, and you make a decision. So the Israelis right now are in that, system. Right, they could wait a month, but even if they do, we could still see things get to that point. It's been more than 6 months now since October 7th, and this was the nightmare scenario from the very first day, is that we were going to get to a broader regional war, and every single month that the conflict has continued, we get closer and closer. Bombs on Lebanon, Houthis, now we're striking Yemen. Now we're shooting down Iranian missiles. Now we got drones flying over the sky. What comes next month? That's my big worry. What comes next year? Hell, or 10 years from now? That's one of those where, we can easily look back on this and say it was a significant moment.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.